So to introduce the morning panelists, Diana Nemiroff is chairing the morning panel. Respected curator and writer, Diana is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and a laureate of the Governor-General's Award in the Visual and Media Arts for her contributions to the visual arts. She held the positions of curator of contemporary and modern art at the National Gallery until 2005. She subsequently served as director of the Carleton University Art Gallery, where she curated an exhibition of Lynne Cohen's photographs in 2006. She's curated over 40 exhibitions of contemporary art and authored numerous exhibition catalogs and articles on visual arts. And Thomas, to your right, is senior curator of photographs at the National Gallery of Canada. She has organized numerous exhibitions and installations in this capacity and is the author and co-author of several catalogs and publications, including No Man's Land, Lynne Cohen Photographs in 2001. Among her various current projects, such as The Intimate World of Joseph Subic, which comes in fall 2016, she is most excited about a series of exhibitions with accompanying catalogs from the National Gallery's collection of photographs and a team project on the history of Canadian photography, as well as an independent research project on photography and art post-electrification. Finally, and not least, Lorraine Gilbert has been producing and exhibiting photographic works since 1980. These works have been featured in exhibitions such as Global Nature at the Canadian Museum of Contemporary Photography, which is a traveling exhibition, Flora and Fauna, a National Gallery of Canada group exhibition, and The Tree from the Sublime to the Social at the Vancouver Art Gallery. Canadian Landscapes 1993 to 2013 was the title of a large survey exhibition of her work curated by Marcel Louin at the Centre d'Art Expression in Saint-Hyacinthe, Quebec. Gilbert has been teaching art and photography for the past 25 years and is currently the interim director for visual arts at the University of Ottawa. Please join me in welcoming Lorraine.
Yes.
So, and I'll project. I thought as the moderator I would be introducing the panelists, so this panel may be shorter than I expected. I hope we'll have some lively conversation and fill it out. I thought when I got the invitation to moderate the panel, I thought that's something I would like to do. It's fits in a way with how I knew Lynne, which wasn't intimately at all. In fact, as I was saying to Anne earlier, before this symposium began, when I was first at the National Gallery, I thought of Lynne Cohen as kind of Anne's territory. Anne assured me she's not territorial, but you had done that exhibition Environments with Lynne Cohen and Robert Beltredici and Karen Smiley, and I think that might have been the first opening that I went to at the National Gallery, so you can understand where I got that sense. But then, of course, Ottawa being a small place, I gradually got to know Lynne, and in the end, I even curated an exhibition of hers, one of the first ones that I did when I went to be the director of the Carleton University Art Gallery. And we showed unpublished small photographs as well as some recent large works, and it was a lot of fun, although Lynne was not on the scene. She was in Europe, and we corresponded by email. But she came for the opening, and it was a grand occasion for me, particularly since I had ambitions for the gallery, and Lynne was an artist, to my mind, of the highest stature, so I thought it came together nicely for both of us, and it shows how generous she was. I have a photograph of Lynne Cohen, and not one of her photographs, I wish I did, but a photograph of her. She's in the background of a photograph taken on an outdoor terrace of a cafe where a group of us had gathered after a symposium organized at the National Gallery on the occasion of the Crossings exhibition I organized in 1998. She is talking very intensely to a companion who is not in the frame. Maybe it was Andrew. And this is how I came to know her, as a very engaged, very focused, intense artist whose work was on the crest of a wave that changed the face of photography as we know it today. In the early 70s, when Lynne started making photographs, as Andrew said, she trained as a sculptor and printmaker, photography had its own history, run parallel with contemporary art, but less rarely integrated into the contemporary art world of exhibitions and museum collections than it is today. It's easy, looking backwards, to see that photographers and artists were part of the same transformation of vision that swept through the 20th century. But at the time I'm referring to, its traditions could be described as proud but separate. The exception was photography in conceptual art, and I'm so pleased that Andrew projected that image, which is so typical of the kinds of casual photographs that conceptual artists made. Artists like Lynne Cohen and Jeff Wall and Susie Lake started making relatively artless photographs that were part of a larger artistic project. And one of the hallmarks of these projects was what I would call contamination. They injected the real world out there, with all its weird anarchy, into the pristine, impersonal art world. We have to remember minimalism, abstract art. And in so doing, invigorated it and gave it new life. The fact was, there were amazing resemblances between the two worlds. Life does imitate art, and this is one of the discoveries we make when we look at Lynne Cohen's photographs. Working with narrative, working with quasi-documentary series, like those of the German photographers Bernd and Hillebecker, who allied themselves with the serial strategies of minimalist artists like Carl Andre, and more recently, working with color and in large format, are among the ways that artists using photography, like Lynne Cohen, made their work part of the mainstream of contemporary art. Historically speaking, she was at the forefront of this movement in which art and photographic merged, to the point that today, photography is the predominant means of visual expression, both in the culture at large and in the art world. But there's no way we could mistake one of Lynne Cohen's images for one of the banal impressions that are common currency in our digital universe. For one, her work is distinguished by tremendous formal rigor. Her photographs, almost from the beginning, are informed by a penetrating visual intelligence. She saw, as Andrew pointed out in the surfaces, she saw the deceptions, the inconsistencies, the faulty logic, and even the humor in what I like to call the engineered world that was her subject. In the interview published in Anne Thomas's 2001 exhibition catalog, No Man's Land, she says about her subject, "My work has always been about psychological, sociological, intellectual, and political artifice." Elsewhere in the same interview, she adds, "The force of my work would be diluted if it weren't mostly true." I like that, mostly. Such humor as her work exhibits is largely embedded in objects, as the subtle juxtapositions of her photographs on each page spread in the No Man's Land catalog exhibits. I recommend that you go and study those juxtapositions. They are hilarious. Behind her cool scrutiny of the sometimes bizarre artificial environments that model, frame, and ultimately shape human appearance, behavior, and ideas, there is an uncompromising artistic vision and an intense, even tenacious engagement with truth. And this is what makes her work important to us today. Thank you. So first up is Anne. Yeah. Take that here. Is that good?
Yeah. Now, have to make sure that I get my slides on. Yeah, maybe. Let's see. So, going back to Diana's comment about Lynne's formal rigor, what I'm going to talk about in the 10 minutes allotted to me is, and show you slides, is my experience, my very privileged experience of working with Lynne over a period of a decade. She was both very challenging, and she was just intellectually so, so interesting to work with. She had so much rigor applied to her work. But of course, you can imagine the kind of chaos that ensued when she was in a period of reconsidering something like format. So the exhibition that Diana alluded to, the Environments Here Now exhibition, happened in 1984. And there were 3 photographers, Robert Del Felici, Lynne Cohen, and Karen Smiley. And the catalogue is nothing to be looked at. I'm afraid that happened. But anyway, so it was during that period that Lynne started to reconsider the size of her prints. So up until then, she had been making contact prints, starting with, as Andrew mentioned, with 5x7, using 5x7 camera, and these elegant, beautiful, intelligently conceived images, printed superbly. She used to call these later like gourmet platters. And anyway, during this period, she started to enlarge from her 810 contact negatives. And so the scenario would go as follows. I would prepare the lists for matting and framing, and I would send them down to the workshop, and I'd get a phone call from Lynne. She'd be downstairs, and she'd say, I just want to show you an example, and this was one such example, of an office, and in those days, as Erin and I were talking about, she did actually title her works. We knew if it was a waiting room or a classroom or a laboratory. And she said, I want you to look at it. You don't have to put it in the exhibition. Of course, I'd go downstairs and take a look, and it would be astounding. Because she was translating from this amazing contact print into something that was starting to have a different kind of feeling to it. As she said, when she started to enlarge them, she was wanting to make them more political and more so that you would enter into the space. And they were as beautifully printed and as convincing as the contact prints, but they had this different additional edge to them. And so, of course, I'd end up having to recall my matting orders and then to change the size and to include them. So that was, I think, the first exhibition where we were really showing this step further. And of course, it was just one step in a series of steps that Lynne would take. Because she was, although she went back to the same subject matter, and I will touch on that, she was, it was always done with tremendous thought and consideration of what she wanted to say through her images. And this one, she says, I made the first picture I stand by in 1971. Once I saw the pictures larger, I realized there was no good reason to continue contact printing. Which is not to say that she ever, like some photographers have done, they discredit their earlier, smaller prints. She never did that, but she knew that what she wanted to say at that time, that the larger prints were where she wanted to be. And she said the larger prints were less than 9, and the subjects looked even more like construction. So in a little way, she's going back to that Guillaume de Bayle experience of wanting these to have a physical installation reality to them. Then on color. So that was my first exhibition with Lynne. And I had known her work before that and admired it tremendously. Jim Walkman, I must add, was very prescient in collecting her work very early in the 1970s. And so we had this wonderful range of of representation of her work from very earliest prints up until late work. And then on the color, I think it's in the No Man's Land catalogue, we were asking her about color, and she said, yes, I've tried color, but no, it wasn't No Man's Land. It was earlier than that we were talking, and she said, I've tried color, but it doesn't really work. But she was working on color. So this is the other thing about that I really admired was, and as part of this formal rigor, is that she, it didn't matter if suddenly color was the rage in the market, in the art market. She waited till she was ready. She never enlarged her prints because there was a need or a requirement from the market to have larger prints. It was because it corresponded to something conceptually, intellectually that she wanted to say. And with color, she had started working on it, but it wasn't just like filling in black and white or substituting for black and white. She had come to understand something about chroma rather than just color. It was this idea that you could interpret color, that color had a significance in it, a meaning. And I can't think of many photographers, I can think of Stephen Shaw as a great colorist, but the understanding that she brought to color was something special. So for example, with this, and she relished the fact that people went into an exhibition of hers in New York, where she first showed color prints, and came out thinking that they were black and white. So she played with that boundary, that edge between color and black and white. And this is an example of one that I think you can. And she also said that, in fact, you could look at the black and white black and white photographs, and you could read what the color in them was very often. And that was quite true. I think she took the example of a naga hide couch or something like that. So she had this understanding of how we translate works, black and white works too. And so this, I think, is one of the extraordinary works that brings together the color. This idea Andrew pointed out in the earlier one, in that wonderful early photograph, how she picked up on reflection. Oops, never mind. I think I'm too close to the beam to work, but anyway. And this was one that really got me thinking about how she understood the sort of noxiousness of the blue in this print. It's, you could smell it, and she often talked about the sensory aspects of the work, how you could smell the old beer bottles and the stale beer or the ashtrays or something in those early black and white works. But with this one, you could, the chlorine, there was something about it. There's a kind of veil over the pool. And so this was, I think, yet the next step, and I felt tremendous sort of excitement about going through this experience of seeing her explore and investigate color and make these sort of proposals about what color could be in the image. This, I think, is another example of, what sort of photographer who's really crazy about making color photographs is going to choose a subject like this with such subdued tones in it, almost like a kind of, a paint swatch. But of course, she used to refer to this as well as Bryce Martin Ragbit Hall, and at the same time picking up little details for your attention. It's like, well, I can't point with this, but you can. Sorry, but she would point out the, the door where the plugs were. Why would the door handle be so high in that, on that door? The oddness, the peculiarity of it, and the sort of interesting and human foible aspect. Another one where there were references, of course, to the Madame Recamier couch in this, but a very monochromatic tonal range filled with humor. This was made in Vienna, I think, was not Andrew, and where she was in the Dorotheum auction house and looking at these antiquities with this wonderful sense of wry humor and wit and unveiling the kind of ordinariness in a way of what was being displayed as high art. value added. And this one, I think, again, is play on color. It's a very complex, all of her photographs just demanded that you kept looking at them, and you find out you'd be more greatly rewarded the more you look. But most of it is monochromatic. There's an easel, almost expectantly awaiting some great work of art to be placed in front of it, with this luscious red behind. And this is almost as if you could transmigrate all these formal elements into something that would then become a picture. A very interesting and unique use of color that I have not seen in other works by artists working in color. This, I think, again, is it's marvelous to see the reflection, and it's this pure, dense. It's a couch by quite a famous. I showed it to a mutual friend of ours in Vienna, and he immediately recognized the designer of the couch. Of course, by this time, maybe Andrew was privy to where the sites of a lot of these places, but she was not telling on the spot. And the way that that color gets transformed as it's reflected in the chrome surface. It's just an extraordinary work, probably with references to that wonderful Man Ray of the Lips in the Cosmos as well. And then this very playful but sinister, the sense of how children are fed a color palette that's often supposed to be fun. And it's used in this more sinister, it's very sinister. And then on referencing art, she talks about the uncanny references. This starts early in her work. The pursuit clocks, Archibald desks, fixture in one picture looks like a Flavin. Fixture in another looks like a Judd. And these are two early works where she talks about the one on your left, the wall piece looking like a Judd wall piece, and the one on the right, she used to like to talk about the fluorescent lights being Flavin-esque. And then back to and this was the Bryce Martin. And then a wonderful thing happened, which Andrew will possibly recall. I was in a conversation with Lynne at the Design Centre in Toronto, and I was trying to cull some Archfogger images from the internet. And suddenly I came across, how you get this random array of images. I came across Lynne Cohen's, one of her offices, untitled, of course. It was this one, it was titled Archfogger's Office. And I think that was the code that we were using at one point for some of these works. And so it appeared very kind of mundanely as an Archfogger office. So kind of migrated into that. And then on subject matter, I think she made, this is, I think, I've missed Lynne's words terribly, as much as we are very happy and delighted to still be in her realm of pictures. Her words were always so insightful about her work and unpretentious. As Andrew said, she just said things very clearly and directly. And one of the things that I remember just being struck by was how she was able to talk about her engagement with subject matter. Because people very often don't distinguish between, they say, well, she's always doing spas, or she's always doing classrooms, the same subject. It wasn't the same subject. She was looking at the way, as she says, an artist returns to subject matter, but she was finding different issues, different different complexities and contradictions that she wanted to bring to our attention. And on her work desk, on your right-hand side, were some works that I think some might have been realized, others were in progress, but she was looking at this array of works. Yes, there were spars, but they went back, and if you were to compare the spars from the early period, the 70s, to what she was doing later, the exploration was taking her further and further, almost a longer journey towards new realizations. So, and then the last thing is, of course, this wonderful book, a featured one of her photographs, the mystery photograph, and it was a competition. I think you could win $25 if you could write a narrative around the photograph of the shooting range. And I think they should have rather, would have made a much more interesting photograph, would have been, sorry, the one with the, in the spa with those odd rubber suction areas with the pictures. I mean, I've never figured that out.
That's so weird.
So, I think that's it. That's just, it was a phenomenal journey, and you know, keeps me thinking still. So, yeah. Yes. Okay. Get this to work. Hello? Yes? Okay. Hi. Okay. I had to write things down because I find it difficult. Sometimes I lose myself, and then I can find myself again. I'll try and talk a little bit, but probably not that much, but I'll practice. So I'm going to be talking about Lynne as a teacher, and well, I was her student, but not so much her student, but she was a guest artist when I was a young artist. And so I met her then, and I really looked up to her then, and then later came here. And anyway, I wrote all this here, so I'll just read it. As much as I'm a great admirer of Lynne Cohen's work, I had the good fortune also to be a student of hers in 1979 and 1980, when she was invited to the Banff Center, and again later at another school in Upper New York State. I then became a colleague in 1989, when I first came to teach at the University of Ottawa. I'm very happy to have the opportunity here to pay her tribute as a devoted teacher and mentor that she was. Lynne has influenced countless numbers of students, many of whom became teachers of art and photography themselves. I being only one of many. During her long teaching career, I was a witness to how much she cared about her students. I also experienced her authenticity as a generous mentor when I first began teaching. Although she had accomplished so much with her work as an artist, she always talked about the students, like the students of a group, a body, with great affection, saying that it was they who made it all worthwhile. At first I thought she was just saying that. Later, I realized that she really meant it. Her teaching role was not the learned ego, but more as the buffer between the institution and the student. Now, when she was teaching here, we didn't have a graduate program yet. So she was, teaching undergrads who arrived from high school. These days, they're 17 when they arrive. And they don't, know very much why they're in the program. So they like photography, let's say, and so they will be, want to learn photography. And one of the things here, I guess it was 2001 when she had a retrospective in No Man's Land. When she had her big retrospective at the National Gallery of Canada, I asked my own first-year students to go to see the show and to answer questions about Lynne's work. But I let them go cold. We hadn't talked about any of it, they hadn't seen any of it, but it was major homework, you have to go do this. So they walk into the space, and here's an example of a question. Why are there never any people in Lynne Cohen's pictures? And one of the students answered rather charmingly, because when she comes into the room, all the people run out because they don't want to be in the picture. This is so funny. I never saw Lynne so pleased and amused when I shared the student's answer with her. She laughed to tears. So, it's expected that an artist's research or studio practice should influence their teaching in the university.
Lynne had a singular way of doing this, to say the least. Perhaps it was her heightened suspicions about institutions and what kinds of learning went on within its walls. Perhaps her acute awareness of how buildings, rooms, and furnishings within institutions contributed to a kind of ideological assimilation or dumbing down of the visitor or victim population within its walls. Anyone who has been to a talk by Lynne, sorry you weren't able to go to her talk. Anyone who has been to a talk by Lynne about her own work will know that she tended to actively embody the ideas that were carried in the clues and appearances of objects or surfaces in her work. For example, a barely perceptible stain from who knows what source on a floor or wall would be pointed out with a visible shiver, followed by a wide-eyed, slightly demonic look, which inquired as to whether her audience were also troubled by this detail. We had one photography classroom in the basement at 100 Laurier, still the same one today, and it has been shoddy ever since it was renovated in 1970, in the 70s at some point, I think. In that very classroom, Lynne used this same humorous and entertaining way of explaining her ideas to great effect, and she succeeded in waking the students up to become much more observant, more aware, and more critical of their immediate surroundings, no matter how benign, neutral, or banal. Still an important lesson for all artists. Throughout the years, I've heard so many endearing and very funny comments about Lynne from the students, some of whom I solicited in May and June of 2014 to help me write this short tribute. But I never had a place to do it, so here we are, and I'm really happy to be able to share this with you. I asked them to tell me what they remembered most about Lynne, or to tell of an incident where they were touched or otherwise influenced by her, and this is what I received. What I remember was her great sense of observation and humor. She turned ordinary things into something odd or curious. For example, she would look at details such as the baseboards in the classroom being unevenly put together, or a slightly crooked light switch at an odd height. You know, it was like Roland's idea of punctum, where the insignificant, the unnoticed, became something that grabs your attention, your interest. I think what she taught me was to be observant and to question everything I saw. It was about seeing what otherwise remained invisible or unworthy to consider. Her assignment themes were strange to me as well, especially at that time. For example, engage the idea of garbage or the museum. At first I thought, why would anyone want to do that? Later, I realized how much potential this had in reflecting about the world we live in. Both these themes are about how we behave with our stuff. This is Chantal Gervais' comment, who is now a teacher in the same department of photography. I'm humbled to have had Lynne in my life, first as my professor and mentor, and then as my friend. My life is richer than I could have imagined in 1990 because of her. It was Lynne who helped me connect with Nancy Spiro and Leon Golub for an internship, and Lynne who made sure I gained entry to graduate school. Her actions changed the trajectory of my life from working class to middle class. She taught me how to teach and how to be with students. Now, Lynne is in my heart, in my humor, each time I enter the classroom as a professor. And this is by Calla Thompson, who is here today. She came all the way from Maryland, where she teaches at the University of Maryland, and she's here, which is great to see you. Now another person. Lynne was great. I loved her as a teacher and was lucky to have her for more than one of my photo classes. She taught many photo classes at U of Ottawa with Michael Schreier, Evergon, and Charles Gagnon, a dynamic team of art professors. There she was, trim, concise, alert, wry, and brimming with art consciousness, all while holding her purse. I think she inadvertently also taught us a lot about installation and sculpture. For one project, a theme of her own work, we collected garbage, found objects from the alleyways for several weeks and then made reconstructions with this stuff, which we then documented in the studio. Now that was a fun project. That was Nani Jordan, who now lives in Vancouver. Lynne was such a cool and super funny prof. One day in class, she demonstrated her superior ability to bark like a dog. It was both seriously impressive and creepy at the same time. She seemed to be pretty happy to get shocked reactions from her students. I am so happy to have learned from her. And that is Darcia Hewitt, who is now, I think, in Montreal, and anyway, an artist in her own right. Lynne Cohen was both a teacher and a mentor to me, a supporter and my friend, and I feel fortunate to have known her in all those roles. I will miss her fearlessness and fierceness, her open, honest frankness. That's Jeffrey Brown, who lives here in Ottawa. I'll have to paraphrase from memory, but when I think of Lynne's combination of humor and criticism, I think her comment to me was, "I've always been fascinated by the fact that we've sent a man to the moon, but I've never seen an electrical outlet that hasn't been installed crooked." And that's Stephen Stewart, who became a grad student also. Her class was informative, fun, and productive. She carefully selected the topics and artists she introduced us to. Her comments encouraged students to think beyond the eye and the visible. Her remarkable sense of humor provoked laughter and created a lovely atmosphere among the students, and her critiques were a great way to teach, seeing through looking and listening through hearing. In the darkroom at the department, she taught me how to make enlargements for the first time, and it was one of the unforgettable experiences in the darkness of the lab. Lynne was among those professors who believed in socially engaged art. She pushed students to explore in depth their subjects in form and content. I have learned tremendously from her, and that is from Rihab Mazal. My experience of Lynne was of a person who was at once generous and exacting, curious and uncompromising. Over the years, I often felt honored that she'd found me worthy of sharing those qualities when I was her student. Roland Maurice. Lynne told us not to put any mustard or ketchup on our prints. No extra fluff, just keep it clean. That's from Joanne Guillemette, who is here, who is now working at the archives, and she's here today also. Okay, another one. My first show of significance as a young photographer was Exposure, a group survey show at the AGO in 1975, or I think he means the Ottawa Art Gallery, but I'm not sure. In 1975. Lynne was also in that show, and her image of an empty public space was haunting but beautiful. It stood out in the range of photographs that were chosen. In 1975, Lynne was teaching at the University of Ottawa. One day, she phoned and asked if we could meet. I went to the school and met her for the first time. I went to this, beyond the images, it was that genuine smile that greeted me and then and for many years after, that I truly loved and appreciated. This was a very good person. She asked me if I would be interested in teaching her class as she was going on leave for a term. It was the first teaching opportunity in my career. Beyond the fact that I did not have an MFA, I hope that my photos influenced her to make that phone call. I will always be grateful for that. I will always be thankful for knowing Lynne. She made an enormous contribution to Canadian photography and truly deserved the recognition for her work. I will always think of her photographs and remember the smile. That's David Barber. who is still working here in Ottawa. He also teaches. The night before a crit, critique, right? I had agonized over how to present my photos. I had taken close-ups of buttons and decided to put them into an old sewing basket I had in my basement. I produced the basket of photos in class. When it had worked its way around to Lynne, she tipped out the photos, opened the basket to reveal the pale, oops. Okay. All right, I'm going to start that sentence over. Okay, the pale green padded inside lid. So it's the sewing basket. Pictures of the buttons are out, and she empties them out, and she looks at the padded lid, the green padded lid inside it, and declared it the best thing about the project. The students were aghast at this proclamation, but it was funny and insightful and summed up so much about Lynne's fearless way of seeing. With her deftness of humor, she sanctioned how I could see the world with all its beauty in the mundane. This is by Zoe Ashby. Back to my own words here. Which I've lost again. Oh, here it is. In March 2013 was the last time that I saw her in action as a teacher. I took my class to Montreal to see her exhibition at the Musée d'Art Contemporain. Despite her obvious fatigue, she graciously accepted to talk to us about her work there. Although none of these students knew her, I watched them mesmerized by her explanations and stories, by her energy, and just by who she was. At the end of that semester, one of those students told me that seeing Lynne Cohen was the high point for her in that class. When I asked her why, she said because of her beautiful work, her generosity, her bravery, and by the way her eyes lit up when she talked to us about art. She added, I want to believe in something like she does. From myself and all of the students, thank you, Lynne.
Thank you, Lorraine. I've been sitting here in this room listening to Anne and to Lorraine's insightful comments, but I've also, I'm staring out at you, but I'm also taking the room in, and I'm noticing that for University of Ottawa rooms, I'm usually nicely finished. But you may note that there's a kind of an observation window up there, and I suddenly realized that if we all cleared out, it could be a subject, you know, it could be part of her. I amused myself also in the exhibition by trying to figure out, with a certain degree of success, I think, which photos had been taken in Europe and which had been taken in North America. There is a difference in the details. So I invite you later to go back to the exhibition and play this game with me. And now it's your turn. If you have some questions for any of our panelists, go ahead, please.
You were quite wrong about the show you did with Lynne, because she was there every step of the way. And I say this because she was very impressed that you were so artist sensitive.
We communicated by emails, yeah.
No, she was there, face to face. No, really. Anyway.
We're remembering two different phases of the show. Yeah.
With Carleton University.
Yeah.
We could talk about it.